The sacred cow has been slain. After Duskbloods was confirmed to be a Nintendo Switch exclusive, it's like somebody just flipped a switch. All of a sudden, people were beginning to notice the things that I had been saying for years, the things that was bringing up, and the things that were very apparent to me. It feels like it's now kind of a mainstream thing because traditionally, the reason why FromSlop was hyped up the way it was because it was something that the industry thought they could gaslight people into believing was better than Mario, Zelda, and Metroid. Like the entire reason FromSlop was allowed to become so successful and become so popular, like even though game journals can't really beat them and like don't really care about them at all, like the entire purpose of it was to downplay Nintendo, and that's very apparent. If you look at like new old NeoGAF posts from like around 2011 and see how often like the posters on there insist that like Dark Souls is way better than any Zelda game, you really begin to notice like the patterns of just how obsessive and cultish these people have been over the past like almost 20 years now. Demon Souls is almost 20 years old. So these guys have when Elden Ring came out, it was universally like considered a masterpiece. It was considered one of the best games ever made, and for a while there, like just before the Duskbloods was announced, there was this push to classify it as the game of the decade, and just really glazing this and hyping it up to be like this all-time great game. And for when it came to me, when it came to older players and people who like played Dark Souls and stuff like that when it was new and before it was popular, like there was this big like underground thing where pretty much everyone universally agreed that this game was not as good as Dark Souls. Like, it felt like a rehash. There was nothing new, fresh, or exciting. This was just the same thing again with no real innovations outside of this idea that, like, well, it's in an open world now, but there's nothing in it. There's nothing to find. It's not a fun game, okay? Like, Elden Ring, very specifically, was not a perfect game. There were lots of things that you could say about it. There are lots of things that just weren't good about it. And, people like myself were playing the game and bringing it up. It was very, very apparent to pretty much everyone that, Elden Ring was kind of a disappointment. It wasn't what it was cracked up to be, essentially. This was not the best game of all time. It was kind of limited and stale compared to the much more innovative Breath of the Wild, which came out 5 years before, and Tears of the Kingdom, which came out the year afterward. Like, Elden Ring was just not on the same level as what Nintendo was doing at that time. Like, not even just with Zelda, but with, all their other franchises as well. And for a very, very, very long time, until the Duskbloods was confirmed to be a Nintendo Switch exclusive, the narrative was, don't talk about this. You could not criticize Elden Ring at all. You could not bring up the reality of its situation. You could not, critique it. You could not criticize it. This was a perfect video game, and if you criticized it, that just means you got filtered. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I was told that, you just got filtered, bro, or you can't beat it, when, I actually played quite a lot of the game. I got several hours in, I beat some bosses, and I kind of noticed that it's really not that fun. It's really not that challenging. It's really not that difficult. You just explore until you find things that you can use to kill other things. That's it. There's no depth when it comes to the dungeon design or the boss variety or the combat mechanics. Basically, like any other FromSoftware game, you just keep playing the game until you can find something that you can exploit that just works. You just keep building your character until you can actually beat the next boss, and then you just go on to the next boss. That's it. There's no real technical depth to Elden Ring. It's not really fun. It's not even well animated. It doesn't even look good. Anybody who says this couldn't run on a Switch 1 is delusional. I've been saying this for a long time, but it's so interesting how during the Wii era, there was this narrative that oh yeah, Nintendo games don't look as good, they don't play as good, they're not realistic, oh the animations are sloppy, or like people spurred out about Nintendo visuals, and then now in 2025 we have Elden Ring, which looks and plays worse than games that came out in like 2007. It's crazy how sloppy Elden Ring is. It is crazy what this game, like how little this game offers, and how little like that, how little it's grown and evolved, and how like they're still using assets and animations that were established back in Demon Souls. Like this is an extremely derelict, rehashy IP with no real innovation or change. And the thing about that is that the vast majority of the audience just can't bring themselves to admit it. They can't admit how stale and repetitive these games actually are, and they get very very upset if anyone brings it up, and it's kind of considered taboo in the community to bring this up. Traditionally, like the idea that Elden Ring has fallen off, or that the idea that like Elden Ring isn't as good as like it's hyped up to be. Like it's just not something you're supposed to talk about. Like that's just the reality of the situation, is that Elden Ring is a game with a ton of problems that clearly did not live up to the hype. And yet, like, the narrative has always been this idea that, like, well, like, don't talk about that. It's better than what Nintendo's doing. It's better than anything you've ever done. Like, oh, Elden Ring. Like, Elden Ring is just the textbook example of, like, the random third-party game that was put on a pedestal because the industry thought they could weaponize it against Nintendo. Right. And now that it no longer serves that purpose, now that it's getting a Switch 2 port, now that it's getting like a new entry exclusive to Nintendo Switch, like it's being taken out with the trash. Okay. Like pretty much everyone universally agrees that the Dustbloods is not going to be successful. It's not going to be as big of a deal as Elden Ring. But like what people don't want to admit is to why, because I keep seeing people see this thing that like it's because like Nintendo consoles are inferior, or like the multiplayer or anything like that. Like the simple reality is like FromSoftware was never popular. Like this was a game that was promoted and hyped for over a decade because the industry thought that this was going to be a Nintendo killer. They thought that this is something that they could use to finally be the elusive Zelda killer that they've been seeking out for the past 40 years. Hydlide couldn't do it, Dark Cloud couldn't do it, Dark Souls couldn't do it. But they thought that Elden Ring was good enough to pull it off, and in the end it didn't, Like in the end it fell flat on its face. It wasn't that successful. It was something that was like put on a pedestal and played by normies and sold to casuals who never beat it. Elden Ring is the very definition of a game that is all hype and no substance. And the simple fact of the matter is, after the failure of the DLC, after everything FromSoftware is done, all the flops after, Armor Core failed, Night Rain failed. Like, the simple fact of the matter is, the company is on the way out. It is never again going to be able to coast off the open world hype of Elden Ring. Everything else they do is going to be negatively held against them, and they will never again be able to gaslight people into thinking that Nintendo is better. And because they are now producing a Nintendo exclusive, inevitably what we're going to see is that more people are going to start realizing that, like, wow, FromSoftware is not as good as what Nintendo does. Like, that's just the reality of it. Nintendo fans have been saying that all the time, but, people who are, like, picking up these consoles for the first time are going to slowly realize that, like, Elden Ring is not as good as it's hyped up to be. Dustbloods isn't going to be good. Like, it's going to be remarkable seeing that shift and seeing that, like, that change in consumer culture, because no matter what happens, you're not going to see Dustbloods get the same amount of attention as Elden Ring did. And it is entirely because it is a Nintendo exclusive.